This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee out of our Holy Grails. I have chosen wisely for this one. Wow, how about that? I didn't even plan it. Just kind of rolls off the tongue like an Indiana Jones folder. Okay, we've got two returning guests to Coffee with Kenobi to talk about the third film in the Indiana Jones franchise. The film came out in 1989. It's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. First, from the Riddle Base Card, Greg McLaughlin. Greg, welcome back to the show.
We named the dog Indiana. Sorry, that's another podcast. But thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be on with both of you. And what a fun assignment to go back and relive this movie. So I can't wait to talk about it.
Absolutely. Assignment is good because he is a professor. Now, our next co-host is not a professor officially, but he really is a professor. He's a smart guy. I know you love listening to him on Podcast Stardust and anywhere else you get to hear the dulcet tones of his voice. We're talking about, of course, Mr. Dennis Keithley. Dennis, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Greg. It's really great to be here. It was really fun to get the invite this morning. I wasn't expecting this. And I had literally just been putting these movies on in the background for the past 2 days as just some background noise while I was doing stuff around the house. So this is fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be great to talk with you both. The Indiana Jones Last Crusade is an interesting movie. It came out 5 years after Temple of Doom, so there was obviously a lot of spacing between these movies. There's no regularity, of course. Harrison Ford by this point is one of the great actors of all time, one of the great, most successful movie stars of all time. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, they also did pretty well for themselves. So it was hard to link up all of their schedules to get to this movie. We also have the added bonus of entertaining a brand new character of the franchise, Indiana Jones's father, Henry Jones Sr., played, of course, by the legendary Sean Connery. So we've got a lot to talk about. Looking forward to it with the both of you. Greg, we'll start with you. Give me one word to describe this film and overall thoughts on it.
I knew this question was coming and it was going to be tough, but I would say it just seems like it's frantic almost, because it has that, it's amazing that this other movie kept coming up, the Da Vinci Code, which has some very similar aspects. But it seems like when revisiting this, I kind of forgot how many different chases and action sequences go back to back. And there's not a whole lot of stopping in this. So it just goes at an amazing pace, but yet still be, fun, entertaining, and, you're on the edge of your seat the whole time.
Okay, very good. Dennis, what about you?
I'm going to go with fulfilling, just a way of saying satisfying. I can't decide if this is my favorite of the Indiana Jones movies or if it's Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I absolutely love the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery in this as father and son. And that relationship that they got in here has always been what draws me back to this movie time and time again, in the way that those two relate to each other. And it being the third movie in the franchise and the last movie for so many years before we got Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I just always thought it was a very fitting, very fulfilling, very satisfying conclusion to what was probably one of the best trilogy of movies ever. And so that's, in my opinion, so that was my word.
That's a great one. I got to think about the word still, because when this one came out, this was the summer of 1989. I was excited for this movie, but this was also the summer that Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson started Batman. That movie trumped everything for me. That was the most excited I've ever been for a film that wasn't Star Wars related in my life, still to this day. So I was excited to see the new Indy film, but I was a little bit older than when I first saw Raiders and Temple of Doom, and I was still coming off of my Batman nostalgia and going to Taco Bell and getting the Batman cups. So I always liked this film a lot, and I've grown to like it more as I've gotten older. But the word I will use is illuminating, which is a keyword used in this film. But it's also very illuminating as far as who Indiana Jones is and why he is the way that he is. There's some really cool character stuff in here. Much, much more character stuff in this film than there is in Raiders and Temple of Doom combined. And that's not a knock on those two films, but that's not really what those films are about. This is about a little bit more. And it's got an excellent MacGuffin too. So let's kind of take it back to the beginning. The opening sequence, I think is fair to say is one of the very best opening sequences in the Indiana Jones films, as well as in an action movie period. It's where we have River Phoenix playing a young Indiana Jones. Dennis, you've had these movies on recently, and of course you're a big fan of it. In fact, you said it might even be your favorite movie. Talk to me about this opening sequence and what made it work for you.
Wow, a lot really worked in this, and I think just leading off with River Phoenix doing a great Harrison Ford in this sequence here, just capturing some of his looks, some of his mannerisms, kind of his cadence and the way he says things, and then from there going into, as you were just talking about, Dan, why Indy has some of his key features, his key characteristics. We learned the introduction to him using a whip and how he got his scar on his chin and where the hat came from. And so all of these great background details are there in a highly entertaining action sequence as he's on that train with the circus, I guess is what it was. Just really a fun way to dive into that, and full of great little moments of humor on top of that. You know, he gets out of the cave with the cross, and then he's shouting for all the other scouts that are there with him and the headmaster. He's like, everyone's lost but me. So that sequence is a great microcosm for the rest of the film. It encapsulates everything that's great about the movie.
Wonderful. Greg, what about you? What makes this opening work? Assuming it does work for you.
I have to echo it, and going back and seeing moment of silence for River Phoenix and the career and life that never was. His brother Joaquin Phoenix, amazing actor as well, but I think we would have been better off with River Phoenix still in it. That said, it also says a lot about what scouting was in 1912. Where you can take it and goes like, I like it. Don't go off into the caves because it goes on for miles. I'm like, that's amazing what that is, but. I also like the fact you get some of those points with, the snakes and the whip and whatnot, but they don't dwell on them, especially. And I also like the villain in that, or the guy with the fedora who almost kind of looks like
his
Indiana
name is
Jones,
Fedora.
That's
his
Fedora.
name. That's literally what his name is credited as.
But you don't, he gets a couple of quirks, but I don't have to hear and see that much more. But I do like that, that exchange at the end and so forth. But I thought it was really clever. And, not only does it go into that, but goes straight to, the modern day encounter, as it were. So I would have to say, I agree with you, Dan. It's probably one of the best openings for Indiana Jones that, still ends. When I think about the life preserver, right, as they're on the boat versus the refrigerator from Crystal Skull, it's interesting how they kind of do both, right? It's kind of like he manages to survive, but I think in this instance, my belief is a bit suspended, just like how River can negotiate that train, but it's not, it does its job, but with just giving me a little bit more. And I'm like, I'm okay with that. And it really sets you up for what's coming.
It's such an engrossing opening sequence. If there was a TV series that they made with River Phoenix, as you mentioned earlier, I think you said Dennis, or was it you, Craig? I can't remember. He very much has the mannerisms of Harrison Ford. I mean, it's like it's almost like he's a mime. He's so good at it. Like his nuances, his facial tics, the way he articulates and enunciates things. The great sequence where we find out why he's petrified of snakes, because early in the film we see it's just a snake, no big deal, and he tosses it aside. It's just a masterstroke. And then when he finally, after this terrific sequence, I was very fortunate. The first time I saw John Williams in concert, that was in Chicago, and this was way before I even knew my wife. And one of the things they did is they showed this opening sequence, and he played the music to the screen, but then he would talk and he would explain, hey, this is why we did this. This is why we did this. And he was very, very proud of that sequence from this film. And it very much shows with everybody. And then when he meets the character, you lost today, kid, but that doesn't mean you have to like it. And there's that great shot where they put the hat on him and he ducks down and he looks up and it's Harrison Ford and they play the the familiar Raiders march. He gets punched. There's just a lot of action. It's just great. It's a great intro. And of course, Indiana Jones would start like that. As you said, Greg, it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of River Phoenix, because he passed far too young, far too early. But what he gave us, I think, is pretty iconic, and it very much adds to the legacy of Indy and Harrison Ford. Harrison, in fact, has talked about this sequence and River's performance quite glowingly, which makes me happy.
That's cool.
So let's talk about Sean Connery. Sean Connery, of course, who better to play Indiana Jones than James Bond himself, the original James Bond, Sean Connery. I'm pretty sure Sean Connery was, 6 years older than Harrison, if that. I mean, there's not a big age gap there. But we meet the man who helped to, or maybe inadvertently, create who Indiana Jones is as a character. Dennis, talk to me about Henry Jones Sr. and what makes him tick, and maybe favorite moments you have about him from this movie.
So what I loved about this performance is that I was 15 when this movie came, or turning 15. I actually went and saw it for my birthday, as a matter of fact. And I was used to Sean Connery as James Bond. And my parents were constantly introducing us to all the Bond movies, and we really focused on Sean Connery as Bond. And then we saw him in Untouchables, and roles like we've seen him in things like that, where he started to embrace being an older actor and not being the dashing young adventurer. And so Sean Connery does an amazing job going against the type that I was expecting of him when I saw this movie. And he's the one you're used to seeing punch people. He's the one that's usually saving the damsel in distress. And now he's the one that's captured by the Nazis and is in the tower. And Sean Connery comes in, and then he's as smart a character as Henry Jones Sr. is. He's kind of bumbling in that way. He bashes the Ming vase over Indiana's head, and then he says, "Well, I thought you were one of them." Indiana Jones responds, "They come in through the door, Dad." And so, just kind of this, he's book smart, but he's not street wise at all when it comes down to it. And so he kind of stumbles from place to place in all of this. And you got Indiana Jones who's an incredibly smart character as well, but he's not as single-mindedly dedicated to archaeology as Henry Sr. is, and he's much more competent in the adventure. And so those two are such an excellent foil that way in the relationship. And then, of course, they've been estranged for years, but I just love that relationship. Every time that Indy is ready to run off somewhere and they have to turn around, Dad, just that exasperation that comes out of Harrison Ford's mouth with that. And just kind of, oh, I know what it is Henry says, this is all brand new to me. You do this every day. So it was fantastic casting and such great chemistry between those two.
And when he says, yeah, it happens to me all the time. That was a great line that was from the trailers too. Okay, Greg, talk to me about the man who coined the term junior.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the Untouchables, Dennis, because, Sean Connery is in the midst at this time of an incredible run that kind of starts with him revisiting James Bond in Never Say Never Again, that remake of Thunderball. And then you kind of go through, and I forgot all about The Name of the Rose. And then, of course, he's in, Rising Sun. All these, that kind of culminates with the late 90s with The Rock, which is kind of one of my favorite Sean Connery movies. But here you have a very action-oriented actor that, defeats a Nazi plane on the beach with an umbrella and birds. And I love it when he's quoting, he's like, I remember my Charlemagne, let my army be the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky. I won't kill you with my lousy accent. But that goes to show, he was showing you just when he's attacking the guy and with the pen ink. But also I think one of my favorite scenes in going back was that scene of them two on the plane. Harrison Ford's Indy is very much saying we never had a chance to talk, and goes through all this, and Sean kind of the way you would expect, well, I'm here, what do you have to say? And he doesn't quite get it. He does, and I like that. We see at the cliffs later on, you see that tinge of regret, but it goes right away after it's well, come on, we got to go. So I think he played it as good as you're going to get it for a role of like that.
It's hard to really improve upon anything the two of you said. I really liked hearing your analysis of this character and Sean Connery. Sean Connery, of course, is legendary, absolutely legendary. He's retired from acting. It would have been great to see him come back for Crystal Skull. He obviously did not do so, but his legacy is felt because of his performance in this film. The chemistry between he and Harrison is an absolute dream. I mean, it's almost like a fantasy. Like you say, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Indiana Jones's dad was James Bond? Well, that happened. That happened to perfection. And as you mentioned, Dennis, they play it. He plays it against the archetype of who Sean Connery is. He's a stodgy professor type, whereas I had the least opposite of cool compared to a fedora that Indiana Jones is wearing. He's, as you said, he's very, very book smart, and he's even more single-minded than Indiana Jones, which is really saying something. And he's not streetwise in any way, shape, or form. Both of them are seduced by Alison Doody, and it's the way that they learn about it is great. In fact, I would say that the fireplace sequence, when they're tied up together as they work together eventually to escape, very much led by Harrison, that whole sequence is gold. It's comedy gold. Their timing is impeccable. The way the scene escalates, the floor's on fire. It's really, really well done. And this is a character I wouldn't have been sad to see come back. At the end, my word was illuminating. And I think the end sequence when he says, in Indiana, let it go. He actually said, instead of calling him Junior, he actually uses the moniker that Indiana has adapted for himself, because he sort of named himself, which is pretty symbolic because he doesn't feel like his dad was there for him. When we name our children, we name them. That's one of the ways that we show responsibility, a care for them, not an ownership per se, but like a belonging. So Indy named himself, sort of. Well, when Sean Connery's, when Indy's dad says that, there's an acceptance there. The walls are cut down. And he also combine that with when he thinks that Indy's dead, when he thinks he's gone over the cliff on that tank, which is a spectacular sequence. And he says, I thought I lost you, boy. And he just hugs him. And Indy, of course, in Indy fashion, is in pain while he's being hugged. But the emotion is real. And it's really, it can almost make you cry if you really think about it. It's a wonderful love letter to fathers and sons. And you get to see a little bit of that, as we mentioned last week with Temple of Doom. But here it's on a whole other level with Indy and his dad. And it's really lovely.
I remember back in the 90s when, I can't remember which actor they were on for James Bond, but they had asked Sean Connery, there was these rumors going around about whether he would actually show up in another James Bond movie as James Bond's dad. And he flat out said, no, I put James Bond behind me, but I'm thinking about calling Harrison to play Indiana Jones' dad again. That was a role he really wanted to come back to before he retired from acting altogether. And it's a shame that they never got the opportunity to do it.
Oh, it would have been amazing. All right. So we had Marion, we had Willie Scott, and now we've got Elsa Schneider, played by Alison Doody. When I talk about these movies, I always talk about the actors instead of the characters, which is such a major faux pas. But Elsa Schneider is very, very different from Marion, very, very different from Willie. I would say my least favorite heroine of the leads, the female leads in these films, but that doesn't mean she isn't effective. Dennis, talk to me about her and sort of her presence in this film.
So I'm with you, Dan. Of the love interests of the three movies, she's probably my least favorite, but it's because you don't get too far in the movie, I think, before you really realize that she's not necessarily on the same team as Indiana in all of this. And so she's beautiful and she's dashing in that way, but and there's some great comedic moments, especially in the Venice portion of this film between Indiana and Elsa. But when it comes down to it, she is very greedy and she does betray him. She is one of the best exchanges. You brought it already up, the fireplace scene when she kisses Indiana and said, "This is how Austrians say goodbye." And then the German walks up and punches him in the face, and this is how the Germans do it. To which Henry Sr. says, I like the Austrian way better. But that's, as an aside, the humor in this movie is on point. It is just at the right level. It's not too high. It's not too slapstick. It's just at the right point. Okay, aside over. But as that character, and we get to see that culmination of the movie at the end. And Henry puts it just right. She saw the Grail as a prize. She was after it as a prize, as opposed to what it meant for history. It was about the quest and not about putting the Grail where it belongs and honoring the Grail for what it represents. And meanwhile, Indiana was reaching for it as something that, meant a lot to him and a lot to his dad. But again, getting back to Elsa, it just, again, illustrating the greed that came out in that character and the way she was so manipulative in a way that Marion and Willie were not. And so I think that's a very stark contrast between the three of them.
Yeah, this is, I think, kind of a tough question. You handled it beautifully, as always. Greg, what about you? I'm very happy that you have to follow that instead of me.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think he hit it right, but I would add that it would be very easy for this character to have been really one-dimensional and a caricature of a classic, double cross and just a villain. But I think towards the end, when she's reintroduced and you can see her kind of wavering in her allegiances. I find that very interesting. It's also interesting, when you're talking about what did you just finish seeing? You saw the cup basically heal somebody. There are external forces here at work that's more than just a prize. And so it is amazing that after that, she's, hey, we got the cup, let's go. And they're like, didn't you just hear, weren't you in the last 5 minutes of this movie? But I like the fact that, but I also think that, I kind of struggled a bit with Indy's, grasping for it, because I'm like, oh, come on. But I do like the fact that kind of hits home. And I do think that kind of gives, her a little weight as far as, trying to get this and what it might mean. And even Indy is not, immune from what this could mean for whoever it is, for whether it's for his dad or for history or for a museum or whatnot. But I would say that I think the ending kind of lifts her up. Although, yeah, I think once you do kind of figure out she's a villain, it's probably easy to kind of check out and go, all right, you're going to get what you deserve. We've seen these movies before. It doesn't end well for villains. However, I did feel kind of, I felt bad because it would have been interesting to see her character live, maybe get hurt, but still live, but the cup goes away.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
You brought up an interesting angle that I hadn't considered. I do think she's one-dimensional, but I think she has a purpose. I think she's actually a tragic character, and I never really thought about it before until this conversation. But I don't know that she's a sociopath, because I'm not a doctor anyway, so I wouldn't be able to properly diagnose anyone like that. But there seems to be, something must have made her turn. At the end, she's tragic because she can't let go of the Grail. Her obsession literally and figuratively leads to her death. She works with the Nazis, for crying out loud. It doesn't get much lower than that. And she will obviously stop at nothing. She seduces both Joneses, which creates a great comedic line that we just laughed about a little bit ago. But I like that she's intelligent. Of course, she's beautiful. And it's unfortunate that there's a twist, but I think it's effective. But it also helps to work and pitting Indy and Indy's dad together. I always like the idea that the Holy Grail here, the Last Crusade here, well, mostly the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail, I think, is not about a cup. It's not about Christ. Although you could say, as a Christian, that Christ brings Father and Son together. So the Holy Grail is the reunion of the family. It's the bringing of the Father and the Son together. And I think without Allison doing what she does, maybe that doesn't happen. So I really like that she is, in fact, a fulcrum for that.
Yeah, well put.
Well said.
So we've talked about these two characters. Marcus Brody, we should just talk about him briefly. Marcus is only in Raiders, very, very briefly. Denholm Elliott is the actor, the late, great Denholm Elliott. I'll just start here. There's not a ton to say other than he's wonderful. He knows, what does he know? He knows a dozen languages, has contacts in every country. He's going to blend in. The next thing, does anyone here speak English? He's just a wonderful comedic foil, and he's much more like the father than the son. But God bless Marcus Brody. He is an indispensable character in this film.
He got lost in his own museum.
Yeah, he's on that far end of that spectrum, even beyond Henry Sr. There, and just can't even pick up the clue from Sala. Run, and he's yes, run, yes. He's just, but he was a necessary part of the movie. Kind of the one that brings the quest to the table. One of the key people bring the quest to the table, and again, just adds another bit of that comedy that makes the movie really work.
But hey, he gets the Cross of Coronado at the end, so who really wins? He did very little to get the Cross of Coronado other than just take it. So there you go.
That's true. This movie has, because it's an Indiana Jones film, it's got some wonderful, wonderful action sequences. Let's talk about a couple that really jump out to us. Maybe list of your favorite, and then another one that also works very, very well for you. Dennis, why don't you start us off with that?
Ooh, well, we already talked about the opening sequence with the train, but the tank chase there in the last half of the movie, and we've kind of touched on that as well, because the tank goes over the cliff, and Indiana seemingly goes over after it, only to pull himself over the edge. But just the choreography that went on for that entire sequence with Indiana Jones on a horse chasing a tank. I mean, write that down and make that make sense. But they did in there, and it seems like every video game nowadays draws inspiration from that. The different levels of putting the rock in the barrel so that it'll blow up, and then getting on top of the tank so you can do the next thing, and then that he uses the one gun, and he shoots 3 soldiers, and he just gives it that great look, like what is this thing? And then Henry gets in there and rescues Brody, and so that scene from start to finish, and Sala's going to get camels for compensation, and Indiana's bargain. I said no camels. That's 4 camels. I've talked about how I watched all these movies on in the background. When this scene starts, I sat down and paid attention to every single second of it. It is just really fantastic in the way they pulled everything off, and Harrison rather is so great with his facial expressions. And when he's caught on the barrel of that one gun and he's getting run into the cliff, just the way he's looking at that franticness that he portrays, it's just an A+.
There's real panic in that. It's on par with the Temple of Doom when he's trapped inside that, where the ceiling is collapsing and the spikes come out. Yeah, and there's even though it's going to happen, that's a scene that works so well. Before they shift the direction of the tank, where you think he's going to get smashed into that rock while he's hanging on with his it's a World War I gas mask bag, I believe, that he always wears around him. Greg, what about you?
Oh, the tank is, to me, one of the premier action sequences in this, but I was pleasantly surprised. I'd forgotten about the motorcycle chase from Castle Brunwald, and it leads off with that great callback to the boat sequence where he's like, great, more boats. And I found myself laughing out loud. I'm like, that's a funny callback. But I always loved the motorcycles. I always thought it was odd that at the end the last guy does the wheelie. I'm like, all right, a little bit of ego there as he's leaning on there. But I thought that was a great one as well as they're running. And Sean Connery is just being awesome as being the passenger inside the compartment as this is all going on. So I would just say a shout out for the motorcycle chase because it was just so much fun.
I still have that Lego of the motorcycle chase.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. That's a great scene because after Indy does that, he throws what does he put into the little, it's almost like he takes it like a lance, the barricade, and he puts it in the wheel and the thing, and he kind of has that smirk and he looks like sort of proud of himself, and his dad just looking at him like so disappointed. I mean, for a guy who's always trying to get his father's approval, obviously, that is not the time that's going to happen.
Let me throw in one more. I'm not sure it's necessarily an action sequence, but when Indiana is going through all of the tests, the traps, in order to get to the room with the Grail in it, and how he's thinking out loud, and at the same time, Henry's kind of talking out loud about what's going on with, he has to be penitent, the penitent man, and so they're just kind of bouncing off, even though they're not in the same room. I just love that scene. It kind of got, again, reflected in a lot of movies that have come since. I'm thinking of something like Ocean's 11, where they're talking through the plan, except for, now they're in the midst of it right there. And just the Henry is really concerned, even though he's shot in the gut and is dying there on the floor. And Indiana is desperate to get through those traps, and he keeps his wits about him, stumbles a few times, but still makes it through to the end.
So that was mine. You took mine.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't be. I'm sort of surprised that it didn't come up earlier. It's my favorite action scene. It doesn't have the most spectacular stunts, but I think of the three movies we've seen up to this point, and even with Crystal Skull, perhaps this is the most personal that Indy's ever been in this situation. How many times has he been in a temple or a tomb, or had to retrieve some sort of an object or circumvent some traps? But this is the only time in the Indiana Jones movies where he's not cocksure, or he's always smart. He's always careful. He's always prudent in planning. He's never reckless about it. I mean, he'll take some risks, but they're calculated risks. He's not suicidal. This one, it's not about him. It's about saving his father's life. And he has to believe in something that he hasn't necessarily believed to save his father. That's how deep that love is. That's how deep that sacrifice is. And when he's going through, you legitimately tell that he's worried not about losing his life, but losing the chance to save his father. And that is so beautiful. That's why this movie is illuminating to me, because it's a movie that really cares about the characters who are well established by this point more than it does the action. But it gives us the action to teach us about that. And that's a very, very good piece of storytelling.
Yeah, it really is.
So we're talking about action. This movie obviously is not dark. It's very decidedly a much different direction than Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and again, which we talked about last week on the show. This one has action. It's got character. It's got some great moments of humor, but it's also got a wonderful MacGuffin, the Cup of Christ. So during the time of King Arthur, the Holy Grail, there were two possible candidates to be the Holy Grail. One was the Cup of Christ that Christ uses in the Last Supper when he has his Last Supper. This is my blood, take and drink. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is when Joseph of Arimathea comes up to Christ when he's on the cross. This is Arthurian legend. And when Christ is stabbed, blood and water pour out of the wound, and this cup is used to catch the blood and water of Christ. So there are two possibilities. I don't know that it ever quite says which one is. I think we're supposed to believe that it's the cup of the Last Supper. I believe that's what they say. Mm-hmm. But in Arthurian legend, there were both Indiana Jones's dad, Henry Jones. He is very much an Arthurian scholar. So I just love that. I mean, the Shankara stones are interesting. They really work beautifully when they combine the three together and the diamond inside glows. But that isn't based on anything resembling historical fact. There's historical evidence for the existence of Jesus. Whether you believe him to be the Son of Christ or not, there's still historical evidence that this man existed, that this cup existed. There's evidence that the Ark of the Covenant existed. Something about the MacGuffin, guys, elevates this movie to a different level for me. Again, whether you're a Christian or not, it's just a very compelling idea. We haven't even talked about the fact at the end, besides the joke I said at the beginning, of which you have to choose the cup of a carpenter, because that's what's driving the action. That is the MacGuffin here. Let's talk about the actual cup itself. Is it effective for you? Or why do you think it's effective?
I think it is very effective, and you touched on it, Dan. It's the same reason why the Ark was effective. These are things that I think a lot of people have heard of. I mean, when I was a kid, I had never heard of the Ark, but as I grew up and with these movies, I could appreciate these references a lot more. And you think of the title of this movie, The Last Crusade, and how many times were Crusades going to the Holy Land in order to, on some sort of a holy mission to retake the homeland and that sort of a thing. We've got these knights that wandered into the desert. Only one came back and died of extreme old age. And it really does kind of help ground the movie. And I think not so much with Temple of Doom, but with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I think that's one of the things that didn't work as well for that movie, is that you have this, it's kind of funny to say real world when we're talking about things that we can't, as you were saying, can't necessarily prove, happen. And when you're talking about your faith here, but again, this is something that's been passed down through the ages, been passed down through the centuries, and we're all familiar with these type of stories. And we got to see, I can't remember what the name of the organization was, but the guys that were pursuing them in Venice, that is a direct result of, things that came out of the Crusade in response to that, protecting these legacies. And so, yeah, it worked very well for me. It gave you were able to bring in the spiritual, the mythical, the mysticism of all this, and at the same time, give it a real world grounding, a real world feel.
Excellent. Greg.
I would have to agree. There's enough of myth and religion that kind of really mix, that does give it some stakes. I think, like I said, it's very easy to go after Crystal Skull, especially after having the Ark of the Covenant, in Raiders and this one as well. But I like the fact that it, many faiths can lay claim to that section of the world and to the importance of these artifacts, and whether or not you are trying to keep them in place or whether you're trying to extract them. And you see from the crypts of the Crusaders in Venice to really kind of bringing in even, something older than when you're talking about, Petra, which is, the cavern of the crescent moon or whatever like that. So I like the fact that there's a lot brought into this that really, like Dennis says, it really grounds it, but also does make you want to immediately hit Wikipedia afterwards. Or in our case, we would have hit a library to go look and read more. And, you can kind of do your own research, is like all this kind of, this kind of history that comes around. I want to learn more. I want to know what happens so that I can kind of form my own opinions. Like, wow, a lot of stuff happened to have this here. But even going back to the cup, I love the fact that it's a simple cup. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, it's like you can kind of go and you see the knight and you're kind of, okay. But then I think the whole test of that makes sense. And all right, that's a nice way to present that, which ends up being the first, for me, probably one of the first memes, right? When you've chosen poorly, mm-hmm. In a time before memes, that it was nice how they, it was nice how they wrapped that.
It was a beautiful, beautiful ending because Indy, this is the cup of a carpenter, someone who is not ostentatious or presents as someone who thinks that they are superior, a king of kings. Because Walter Donovan, the villain of this piece, we haven't talked about very much, he wants the fame, he wants the fortune and glory that Indy talked about in previous adventures. And Indy at that point doesn't care. Now he does get a chance, again, as I mentioned, to grab for the cup, because this is what his dad's been looking for, and plus it's such a legendary artifact, a terrific MacGuffin. But it is hard, as you touched upon, Greg, to make something as powerful and effective as the Ark of the Covenant, because of the majesty that Spielberg and Lucas and Harrison and John Williams brought to that particular item. But this comes close for me. It comes close. One thing we haven't talked about is we're looking at these movies. There's always a moment, right? In Raiders, we had a snake pit. In Temple of Doom, we had bugs. In this one, we have rats. Dennis, which one would be the hardest one for you to navigate through, and would give you the biggest heebie-jeebies?
Oh, gee, wow. Oh, man. The snakes from the first one, I think, just because, yeah, the rats carry disease. The bugs could bite you and they could potentially make you sick or whatever. But yeah, those snakes, they bite you, they're poison you. And, they're slithery. Yeah.
Having them on you, because in all three examples, these creatures, well, they're real. These animals can crawl on you. And I think that's where some of the eek factor comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and especially in Raiders, when you have the snakes coming out of skulls, and the like as well.
That'll do it.
Yeah, so yeah, there you go.
Greg, which one would be the hardest one for you to navigate?
I think it would have to be the snakes, only because their creep factor for me is a lot more. Although, like you said, the rats in unison can really tear you to pieces. And as you can see, they will save themselves. They'll try like hell to save themselves. But yeah, I would say the snakes really creep me out.
I don't know what I would pick. I think it would be being on the bridge, because I don't like heights in Temple of Doom. That would have been the hardest thing for me. I mean, if I'm dressed in my Alden boots, like Indy's wearing, and my leather jacket and my pants, and if I'm head to toe covered, I don't think the snakes are going to bug me. I don't know that I would like bugs crawling over me. Rats wouldn't bother me in the least. And in fact, I remember saying to my mom, "What's so scary about that?" And she's like, "What? Rats have disease?" And blah, 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 blah. My wife would probably, I don't know which one my wife would say. I don't think she would like any of them. But if I have to pick one, I think I'll just say bugs, because they would be the hardest to get off of you. But none of the things would stop me.
What makes the rats so bad is there's just so many of them. And, one or two rats, no big deal. But you get an entire dungeon full of them, and snakes or bugs, so they're all going to be bad that way.
Right. That's true. That's very true. Well, that's fine. I can't believe we didn't talk about that before. All right. Well, anything else, as we're wrapping up, go ahead and give your letter grade and any last minute thoughts. And also feel free to defend your grade as well. Dennis, we'll start with you.
Oh, it's an A. It's a solid A movie for me. I'm tempted to give it an A+. Every time I see this movie, I want to call my dad. And now that I am a dad, I want to have an adventure with my kids or do something with them. And it's a great movie to watch on Father's Day. I've done that several times over the years. It just, I heard you all talk about this when you talked about Raiders of the Lost Ark, but as great as stunts and effects are in movies today, they just lost something over the last 20 years with the reliance on CGI and just getting to see there's something into the practical effects and stunts that they were doing back in the day when they made these movies. And it's hard to capture that magic now. And it just made them so endearing in that regard. And I wish they just could have gotten another one of these made when Sean Connery could have participated back in the early 90s. And it's too bad they didn't, but I know they've always wanted to wait for just the right script. And you may argue that it did or didn't happen with the Crystal Skull, but this one is an absolute treasure.
Wonderful. Well, what a great last word there to talk about Indiana Jones and this film. Greg, your letter grade, and any last minute things you'd like to say about it?
In going back, I'm gonna stick with an A. And it's interesting that we come at a time where we just finished celebrating the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi with Harrison Ford in it, and thinking of it being the third one in the series, and this one being the third. How well each of them did in kind of wrapping up what would have been at the time thought the end of the franchise. And I would say in this case, what's nice is we get a completely, although it touches on a lot of moments that make an indie film, I think it did to me, a little better job of creating this captivating story that brings these, introduces new characters, but also kind of, melds in a few old characters as well. And I think it just really did a great job. And I think it really holds up. I enjoy it. It was fun to kind of revisit it again. One thing, had I known that I was going to be on here, John Rhys Davies was in Nashville signing autographs. And I'm like, dang it, I could have now gotten his autograph and said, speaking of which, but I can't say that. But at any rate, but yeah, Sala, he also did an amazing job as well. So shout out to him. But yeah, yes. It's also interesting as well, as we were saying, we come out of Return of the Jedi, we're just getting into our teens. This one, I'm heading into college, my first year of college. I'm a different person, but I liked how this film gave a lot of extra, background and story that, as a 19-year-old, you're like, so I feel like I appreciated this movie more than say, as a 11 or 12-year-old going, what's the Ark of the Covenant again? Oh, okay. So now the road kind of has risen to meet me. And I think Harrison Ford had a pretty good decade ahead, because he still hasn't done, his Jack Ryan movies of Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, or The Fugitive, shot in Chicago. or even Air Force One. Hello, shout out to Air Force One. So he has a great decade of just more iconic characters ahead of him, and but it is a shame that we did not get one more at that time.
I agree. I ordered the Holy Grail from Shop Disney when it came out last summer for Celebration, and it never shipped. And I tried to get it again, and it's gone. How apropos is that? It was just so funny. I can't believe I'm going to do this. I'm going to give this an A+. I'm ranking it higher than Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, truth be told, this is my least favorite of the original trilogy of Indiana Jones films. I used to say it was the Temple of Doom was my least favorite, but now that I'm watching it, or Mason is old enough to appreciate it, and as I talked about last week, I have much more appreciation and admiration for this film and what they try to do. This one, however, is because of how it's much more personal than the other two films, because of the importance of the father-son dynamic. Dennis, it got me a little choked up when you said, every time I watch this, I want to call my dad. That's beautiful. Oh. And I think that's an important part of this. So I had an estranged relationship with my father. I never saw this film with him, but I am a dad now. And so I appreciate sort of the circular nature of that. I think it's very powerful. And as I mentioned, when Indy has to go in and get the cup for Walter Donovan to save his father, it's the most personal and quite captivating. Again, this is the most introspective and character-driven of the Indiana Jones films up to this point. And that, combined with the chemistry that he has with Sean Connery, makes this an A+ for me.
Well said. And something else, it's like, when we have, these, we're not going to have these kinds of adventures with our kids, but it does show an interesting dynamic. Like we know a lot of we know a lot of friends of ours having kids of various ages. And I can tell you, having an older kid, mine's 20, and my oldest is 21. You can see that, I can now kind of see where some of that friction is, where it's like, not everybody's on the same page. But at the end of the day, hopefully everybody comes together. So it's something that, maybe you have to be a father of an older child to start to go, oh, okay, I see this now even on another level.
I love that.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Very well said. Well, the two of you are obviously A+. It's been great talking about Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade with the both of you. Dennis, please let us know what is going on with Podcast Stardust and where they can find not only that, but you online as well.
Yeah, thank you. So Podcast Stardust is my podcast devoted to Star Wars, and it comes out 3 times a week, usually doing some sort of review, discussion, and then we end the week with the news. You can find it on whatever podcatcher you're listening to. And then on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, it's at Podcast Stardust. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter at DJKVER2. I'm not as active there as I am on the Podcast Stardust Twitter account. And then personally, on my Instagram account is at DJ Keithley, and I do a lot more with my hobbies there, running and grilling and things like that. Their travel, that's what you can usually find there.
I always enjoy when your stuff pops up on Instagram, because I know you're going to do something really cool or cook something that looks amazing.
Oh, thank you. That's it's been fun doing that. I really got into it over the past few years with COVID, giving me a chance to develop some things.
And Greg, please let everyone know where they can reach you. You are so dynamic. The Rebel Base Card podcast is a must listen, as is Podcast Stardust. What I really like about what you do is you truly are a man of the people, and you treat everyone like they're a celebrity, and I feel like you just elevate the people you're with, and I really appreciate that about you.
Oh, thank you. That's kind, and I'm gonna tag on to that, because I love listening to Podcast Stardust. I like what Dennis and Jay do. Mm-hmm. I like the news, and these folks like yourself, you guys are workhorses, and just putting out the content. So it's nice when you see that, because I think it pushes a lot of us to going, hey, look, keep going, do your thing, and and of course his voice is amazing. It's just a very soothing. So when I hear Dan, it's like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Like, all right. So it's like
blushing over here.
I know. But I always try to come to it. I'm a podcast listener first and podcaster second. And, I'm standing in front, I'm virtually in front of two of my favorite podcasts. So I just wanted to say thank you and keeping up. Like I said, it's a lot of work that, so at any rate, but I appreciate those words, Dan. I like bringing light to cards collectors and community. And there's so many people out there. And it's nice when you can go to a new area, like we were in Nashville for ICCC, and there was a bunch more podcasters I met, and you just keep, unraveling this onion, and there's just more out there. And when you can kind of connect with that community and you go, you know what, there's so much positivity out there that, a lot of times the negativity gets, highlighted because it makes a lot of noise, but we just have a greater voice, and it's so much fun to meet people and learn about their stories. And, we do the card stuff, Tom and David Modders, they are going to be on our 40th ROTJ card show. We had a great time nerding out last night. That show's going to be coming out. But we've got, Robert Jimenez, who has done some great work for the Star Wars Card Trader for Digital Galaxy. And of course we have the Galaxy show come out, 30 years of Star Wars Galaxy cards. And so it's just fun. It's just, I'm really great at recording. I need to get posting because I've got so much, but there's that, you guys can do this like multiple times a week. I always feel bad when I post a lot back to back because it's like, man, people got to listen to all this. But, you guys are the tent poles that I kind of keep an eye on, to go, okay, this is how it's done. This is how you can do it. And, when I've got folks out there who kind of can show me the way, then I go, okay, then I'm, this is fine. You can do it this way. And in the middle, sometimes I got to listen to podcasts too. I got to listen to you guys. And I'm like a bad penny. I just keep turning up, right? That was one of the last quotes on my list.
So Rebel Base Card all over where you can find podcasts, and where's your social media presence for that? I already know, but I just want you to plug it.
I appreciate that. On Twitter, Instagram, Hive, occasionally on Substack, and Facebook at Rebel Base Card, or you can email Greg at rebelbasecard.com. Like I said, try to get everywhere and get out there, get some cards, enjoy.
Yeah, the two of you are absolute shining stars, and whenever I see your feeds pop up, or whenever I get the good fortune of being on either of your shows, I'm very happy, as are all of us for listening. Thank you both again so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.